We welcome you to another Sunday School lesson. Sunday School is a gift from God. Our lesson takes place when Abraham was 99 years old and the Lord appeared to him, confirmed his covenant, changed his name from Abram to Abraham, and instituted the rite of circumcision for all Jewish males as the sign of the covenant, changed Sarah's name from Sarai and confirmed that he would bless her and she would be the mother of many nations, and give Abraham a son who he was to call Isaac. When God finished talking with Abraham, Abraham proceeded to obey God's command by circumcising himself and all the males in his house. Again the Lord appeared to Abraham in the plains of Mamre with two other angels. As they sat down to eat, the Lord told Abraham that he would return and Sarah would have a son, to which Sarah laughed because she was 90 and Abraham was now 100. Her response led the Lord to pose the question, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" After finishing their meal, the three men got up to go to Sodom and Gomorrah. But before they left, God chose to tell him that he was going to Sodom to judge their sin. Abraham asked the Lord if he would destroy the cities if he found as few as 10 righteous people in the city. The Lord promised that if he found 10 righteous he would not destroy the city, and he left Abraham and headed to Sodom. Our lesson begins with chapter 19. Verse 1 says, "The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. After communing with Abraham, the two angels departed and continued to Sodom in the evening. When the two angels arrived in Sodom, we are told that Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. Lot being seated at the gate of the city indicates that he was a man of some authority, and a respected member of the community. At the city gate, legal matters were decided, justice was rendered, and official business was conducted. As the two angels entered the city, Lot rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground as if he discerned something divine about them. In verses 2 to 3, Lot invites the two men to stay the night at his house, where they could get some rest and get up early and continue on their way, but they refuse, telling him that they will sleep in the street. However, Lot strongly urged them to stay with him because he knew the wickedness of the city. So they agreed to stay, and Lot prepared a quick meal for them, baked unleavened bread, and they ate dinner. Verse 4 says, "Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. After they all finished their meal and prepared for sleep, the young and old men of the city surrounded the house." This seems to describe the start of a riot. Either they had no magistrates to keep the peace and protect the peaceful, or their magistrates were themselves aiding and abetting in this riot. Whatever these people had in mind, it seems that the entire city was involved. Verse 5 says, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." As this mob surrounded Lot's house, they called out demanding that he bring out to them the men who came to you tonight. These were men of Sodom who wanted to rape Lot's male guests. Verses 6 to 14 are omitted from our printed text. In those verses Lot begged them not to harm his two visitors, and offered his two virgin daughters to them instead. In response to Lot's pleading, they told him to get out of the way. So they rushed toward Lot, almost breaking the door down. But the angels pulled Lot back into the house, and shut the door after him. Then they struck the Sodomite men with blindness, both the young men and the old men. Yet these Sodomites, after they were struck blind, continued looking for the door, to break it down. In verses 12 to 14, the angels told Lot to get all his relatives, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone else, and get them out of the city, because they were going to destroy the city completely, for its sin was great before the Lord. So Lot rushed out to tell his sons-in-law to get ready to leave the city, for the Lord was going to destroy it. But they only looked at him as though he was joking, not taking him seriously. Our lesson continues with verse 15. Verse 15 says, "With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, 'Hurry. Take your wife and your two daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished.' Early in the morning of the next day, the angels commanded Lot to get up and take his wife and his 2 daughters who were with him and leave the city. They said that if he didn't do as they required, they all would be caught up in the destruction of the city. The angels didn't include Lot's son-in-laws when they told Lot to get his wife and daughters out of the city, and we can assume that they decided to remain in Sodom, which was a really bad decision. Verse 16 says, "When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them." It appears that Lot had not really grasped the urgency of the situation, for he hesitated. Lot probably accumulated great wealth, and having to flee with virtually nothing from the comforts of the city, he hesitates. Realizing that Lot was hesitating to leave, the angel held Lot by the hand and forcibly dragged him out of Sodom. God rescued Lot because of his mercy, which is everlasting. Verse 17 says, "As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, 'Flee for your lives. Don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away.' The angels brought Lot and his family completely out of the city. Then they told him to flee for their lives or they all would be swept away in the destruction. In addition, the angels told Lot to do 3 things to assure that he and his family would be safe. First, they said don't look back. Obedience was a large part of their deliverance. If they disobeyed God by looking back, they would die. They were only to look forward away from the city. Second, the angels said they were to get as far away from the area as time would allow. Third, the angels said escape to the mountainous area. Lot and his family had to obey all of the angels' instructions. Remember, partial obedience is still disobedience. Verse 18 says, "But Lot said to them, 'No, my lords, please.'" When the angels arrived in Sodom and were met by Lot, he referred to them as my lords, which was a term of respect and does not necessarily mean that he recognized them as being divine. Lot uses the word Lord, which may indicate that he has finally recognized one of the angels as being the Lord. However, it seems that Lot was having some reservations about going to hide in the mountains. Verse 19 says, "Your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains, this disaster will overtake me, and I'll die." Lot acknowledges he knows that the Lord has saved his life by leading him out of Sodom because he has received not just his mercy but his great kindness. But Lot didn't want to follow the Lord's instructions and escape to the mountain, even though that would prevent disaster from overtaking him and he dies. Verse 20 says, "Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it, it is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared." As Lot continued to speak to the angel, he presented another option as a place of refuge instead of going to the mountain. In verse 22 we find the name of this place of refuge is Zoar, which means little. Lot pleaded with the angel, saying he was convinced that his life will be spared if he was allowed to go to the small city. It was Lot's weakness to think a city of his own choosing could be safer than the mountain that God chose for him. Verse 21 says, "He said to him, 'Very well, I will grant this request too, I will not overthrow the town you speak of.'" In response to Lot's request to go to the little city instead of the mountain, the Lord agreed to Lot's request. But the Lord went further, saying, "I will not overthrow the city." God would spare Zoar, the little city that Lot spoke of, simply because he asked. Lot's intercession for Zoar was done merely for his own self-interest, yet God granted him his request. This shows how much the fervent prayer of a righteous man avails, James 5:16. Verse 22 says, "But flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." That is why the town was called Zoar. After agreeing to Lot's request to let him go to the city, the angel revealed how urgent it was for him to hurry because the Lord was holding back Sodom's destruction until Lot and his family was safe. A lesson for us here is that the very presence of good men in any place helps to hold off God's judgments. We have to marvel at the care that God takes for the preservation of his people. Even during the Great Tribulation, The angels who are designated to bring judgment on the earth are commanded to withhold the winds of judgment until God's servants are sealed. Revelation 7:1-3. No matter what we may do, we can't beat God's grace. Verse 23 says, by the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. It was almost dawn when the angels told Lot to leave Sodom. We don't know how long it took for Lot and his family to reach Zoar, but we do know that the sun had come out. We should take note of the fact that the sun had risen when Lot entered into Zoar, because when a good man comes into any place, he brings light along with him, or at least he or she should. Matthew 5:14, Philippians 2:15. Verse 24 says, then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. When Lot was safely into Zoar, the promised judgment and destruction of both Sodom and Gomorrah began. We are told that the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah burning sulfur from out of heaven. The destruction was from God himself, by his own immediate power, and not due to the common course of nature. The names Sodom and Gomorrah have become synonymous with human depravity and the outpouring of God's wrath. Verse 25 says, thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. In overthrowing those two cities, God also destroyed the villages and the cities that were in all the plain, or the land surrounding Sodom and Gomorrah. Finally, God destroyed all the inhabitants of the cities, and everything that grew upon the ground. It was total devastation. Nothing or no one was left alive. That once fruitful valley that Lot chose to live in now lie in the bottom of the southern end of the Dead Sea. This was a punishment that answered the sins of the inhabitants of those cities. Verse 26 says, but Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. The one time that Lot's wife is mentioned by herself is when she looked back from behind Lot. She was following her husband, and undoubtedly she heard the roar of destruction coming from behind them, so she looked back toward her former home. She disobeyed the Lord's command and she became a pillar of salt. Later, Jesus reminded people of this incident to warn them to be ready for his return. His short words, remember Lot's wife, suggests that she lost her life because she was not ready to accept God's mercy. In addition, Lot's wife looking back illustrates other teachings of Jesus as well, including trying to save one's life and losing it, Matthew 16:25, Luke 17:33, and his warning not to put one's hand to the plow and look back, Luke 9:62. Verse 29 says, so when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham, and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. Verses 27 and 28 are not a part of our printed text, but in those verses we are told that the next morning Abraham got up early and looked out across the plain to Sodom and Gomorrah and saw columns of smoke and fumes, like those from a furnace, rising from the cities. Then this verse, which is probably a summary of God's deliverance of Lot, tells of God's favorable view of Abraham. Whenever it is said that God remembered, it means that he is determined to act on behalf of a person to fulfill his word. The Bible tells us that God remembered Noah and saved him and his family from the flood. When the children of Israel were in Egypt, God also remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and delivered his people from bondage. This time God remembered Abraham, and delivered Lot and his family when he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah where Lot lived. Key verse. When God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham, and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived, Genesis 19:29. The deliverance of Lot was not due to anything that he had done, but was due to Abraham's relationship with God. When the angels appeared to Abraham before they went to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, he pleaded on behalf of any righteous people found in those cities. The Lord didn't find 10 righteous in Sodom, but he did find one, just Lot. The point here is that when godly people intercede in prayer for our relatives and friends, our God will hear. He will remember us and keep his promises to hear our cry. It was out of respect to Abraham that Lot was rescued. Lot was not saved because of any virtue in him, but solely because of God's love for Abraham. Thought to remember. What happened to Sodom illustrates God's mercy even in judgment. Even after acknowledging that he had been shown God's grace and mercy, Lot still tried to negotiate with the Lord about where he should go to be saved from God's judgment. The Lord allowed him to go to Zoar just as he requested. Lot is like many of us today. We may know what God is telling us to do, but think we know a better way. But when our way stresses us out, we soon learn that God was right all along. This happened to Lot. After he reached Zoar, he soon became afraid of being there and ended up leaving and going to the same mountain that he thought was not as safe as Zoar. This story serves to highlight God as one who shows patient mercy and grace, as well as one who punishes sin and destroys the children of disobedience. It also shows us that two godly men can respond to God's leading differently. Lot lingered in Sodom, then he argued with the Lord, then he begged the Lord to let him go his own way. In contrast, Abraham obeyed God's will, even to the point of offering up his own son, Isaac. Our lesson next week is entitled, Faithful During Grief. Our biblical reference is 1 Samuel 1:9-20. We are truly glad you spent time to learn this week's lesson with us. We hope you are blessed and may share these with somebody else. We wish you can join us at the Cubao Church of Christ soon. Our congregation is a place to discover faith, find new friends, grow closer relationship with Christ and serve with each other's gifts. Thank you very much, have a great week, and God bless you always, dear brothers and sisters.